Hi, my name is Ken Hughes and welcome back to another video. Today I want to talk about the psychology of survival. We're coming out from the pandemic through captivity into recovery. I'm really interested in how society, consumers and businesses are going to survive this trauma. So I want to take you back to the 19th of September in 2017. I was in Mexico City. I had literally flown in that morning. I was due to speak the next day at a marketing conference. I popped out of my hotel, 12th floor of the Hilton Hotel. I popped out to a local cafe to have some lunch. Was just back in my room checking some emails and the building started to shudder. I'd never been in an earthquake before. What was about to unfurl was a 7.1 Richter scale quake that killed hundreds of people. But as the building started to move, I thought, well, what's happening? Is this real? You kind of second guess yourself. But within a few seconds, once I realized what was happening and realizing the danger I was in on the 12th floor of a tall building, I literally grabbed my phone, grabbed my passport, went out the door, threw my shoes on, located the nearest emergency exit, and as I legged it down that exit, 12 floors, 24 flights of stairs, I think I took 3 steps per floor. Honestly, it was stair landing step, pivoting on the handrail. I think I made it out of there in probably 15 seconds, down 12 floors. The building ceiling was collapsing, the windows were imploding as I went past. It was terrifying. And I suppose looking back, the speed I exited the building at was just pure survival. I was in pure survival mode, that instinct we have as survival. And I think we're all fascinated by survival. We all love those survival stories, don't we? If it's the story of Joe Simpson and touching the void, this idea of having a broken leg and crawling down for 2 or 3 days down the Andes across snow and rock to get to base camp to survive, or if it's the story of the Salvadorian fisherman Jose Alarenga, who was 14 months at sea in a tiny fishing vessel, drinking turtle blood, catching seagulls with his bare hands to survive. You know, we love a survival story. The Uruguayan rugby team who crashed in the Andes in the 70s and ate their dead colleagues to survive. So we're always fascinated by survival, and the research into survival psychology looks at the personality traits that are evident in those who survive. And I think it's interesting to go through those 10 traits now and to say, well, can we use those traits in our businesses, in our brands, in our teams, in our leadership qualities, and in ourselves to make sure that we are one of those people with that survival story to tell. So I mean, race through the 10 personality traits that are evident in survivors. The first one is adaptability, the ability to adapt to a new environment, to change business models, change your approach based on new information. So look at something as simple as Airbnb. When the whole pandemic came along and their product collapsed, their pivot to online experiences as opposed to physical experiences was a good example of sudden adaptability. Then you've got resilience, number 2, resilience, that ability to bend, to take stress, to rebounce back into form. And so, you know, resilience is a real quality in all of the survival stories you'll hear in the newspaper and movies. So look at Ralston, the guy who got his arm trapped under that boulder in the Utah desert. The 127 hours is the name of that movie and book. So he was there for 7-8 days trapped, and he eventually sawed his own arm off to survive. That kind of resilience, that strength of character that you still have both mind and body after all those days to keep on going. Then number 3, you've got hope and faith. So hope, that belief, that intrinsic belief, is a mixture of optimism and realism that you will succeed. That hope, and some people use faith, I believe in a higher power, I believe in a God, that they will deliver you to survival. So we have to have hope. Number 4 is purpose. You have to have meaning and purpose. You have to understand your purpose. You have to have a role. Again, Frankl was in his book Man's Search for Meaning, his time in the Holocaust, he puts his survival down to having a purpose, having a role every day, something to do. He was the camp doctor. He was later the camp psychiatrist, and so having a purpose is really important. It's a quality that all survivors have. The next one I want to talk about is love. And so love, going back to that story of Alarenga, the Salvadorian fisherman who spent 14 months at sea. It was the love for his teenage daughter, who he had become estranged from, kept him going. The idea that he would once again see her. So this love, people do amazing things in life for love. And so often people kind of project a love for somebody on to get them through that survival piece. So make sure that you kind of have the boundaries of those, not the boundaries, the amazing bonds that are existing between family and friends. Maybe you can replicate those in your own business and brand. Next thing we have is empathy. Often, caring for others is what actually makes people survive. So sometimes the soldiers in the trench aren't fighting for a country or for the greater good. They're fighting for their colleague and soldier next to them. And their belief in that is what keeps them going. And so make sure you have empathetic qualities in both your team and yourself. Then we have intelligence, the ability to take in data and process that data in survival mode. That's really, really important. So there's a really good example from a guy called Bill Garleb. He was taken prisoner in Japanese prisoner of war, and he was just getting onto a boxcar on a train, and he was elbowed and pushed, and everyone was fighting to get into the boxcar because they wanted a space to lie down. They had been cramped in a ship for days and days, and they wanted to lie down. And he very quickly looked at the boxcar and realized there was no ventilation. And so he allowed himself to be elbowed and pushed back, and he was the last prisoner of war to get onto that boxcar. And he took a place by the door where there was plenty of ventilation, of course, and 26 people died that day in that boxcar from suffocation. So the ability to take in information around you, process the information, that's intelligence. It's a real key quality for survival. And it leads on to ingenuity. So the ingenuity, the ability to take the information, but also to have creative input to that, and to actually go off in a new direction and do different things. And so again, go back to that Uruguayan rugby team crashing in the Andes in the 70s, to have the ingenuity to know that we have no food, but there are our colleagues there who died of natural causes in terms of, it wasn't disease, it was the crash that killed them. Let's eat them. I mean, it's a horrific decision to make, but it was ingenuity at play in terms of survival. Second last one I want to talk about is flow, that ability to keep on going, to get into flow. That's how people survive. It's one foot in front of the other. And again, the Everest death zone is a great example of that death zone around the 8,000 meter mark where the oxygen is so thin. If you sit and rest for even 1 minute, you're not getting up again. There are bodies there, and no one can carry the bodies down. It's because even if you won't even stop to help your friend, because if you know to stop to help your friend, you will die too. So this idea of one foot in front of the other is what makes it survive. And it's what we need to do in the pandemic right now as business owners too, one foot in front of the other to keep on going. And the last one I want to talk about is instinct. That instinct for survival. It's more of an X factor quality people have. But if you have that instinct, which was kicked in for me in that Mexican earthquake, you just get the hell out. You do what you feel, do what feels right, do what you know needs to be done. And so those qualities, adaptability, resilience, hope, purpose, love, empathy, intelligence, ingenuity, flow, instinct, those are 10 qualities that people who are masters at survival all have, and I think qualities that you need to borrow for yourself through this pandemic as a business leader and certainly leading a team. But interestingly, the research shows us that only about 15% of people in a significant survival event act that way. 75%, the bulk of people, do nothing. By the way, the remaining 10% go crazy and put everyone in danger. They panic. But it's only 15% who have those qualities that I've listed. The remaining, the majority of people, 3/4 of all people in survival moments will simply do nothing. Let me give you a few examples. In 1985, in Manchester Airport, the British Air 2's Boeing 737 engine went on fire just before takeoff. They had the time to come off the runway. They parked up. So it was all kind of calm enough. The fire trucks made it on time. And the engine was on fire and the cabin started filling with smoke. Now, this was 85. There was significant issues with maybe how we did emergency evacuations that were changed later. But 55 people died that day, and most of them in the investigation just sat in their seats waiting for something to happen. They were overcome by toxic fumes and smoke. And so instead of taking initiative, they just sat there and waited. Similarly, in the 1994 ferry disaster, the MS Estonia just left Tallinn for Stockholm. 1,000 people on board. Okay, it was going through a 9-force gale storm. It wasn't great conditions. But when that bow door malfunctioned and opened and took in water, the ship sank within an hour. Now, one of the problems when the investigators came looking is they couldn't understand why of the 1,000 people on board, nearly 852 had perished. And it seemed to be far too high a number based on the fact that they had an hour to evacuation. And the investigation actually found that a large number of people just stood around, did nothing, wouldn't follow instructions, wouldn't, even when they were shouted at and screamed at, just froze, couldn't function, couldn't move. And similarly in the Twin Towers, actually, our most recent example of survival, the people who did survive were interviewed afterwards in a study. And the average time between the incident and evacuation was 6 minutes, but some people waited about 30 minutes, tidying up their desk, checking some emails, closing stuff down, and also just hanging around waiting to see what would happen. It's kind of a crowd passivity takes place. And so this idea of doing nothing is really interesting, because by doing nothing, you often die. And so in business, it's the same in the pandemic. In doing nothing, if we kind of sit back and wait for the vaccines to take hold, wait for everything to return to normal, chances are you're in that death zone in Everest. You're sitting down, you're having a little rest, but that rest is going to kill you. It's going to kill your business. It's going to kill employee drive and goals. And so it's really, really dangerous, this idea of doing nothing. So why do people do nothing? It's actually cognitive paralysis. It's like, the fight-flight response. There's also the freeze response. And the freeze response, by the way, is fine if you're a rodent and there's an owl hunting you, because an owl will use movement to target you. So the freeze response is correct. You're the little mouse, you freeze and you will survive. But in business, freezing in a rapidly changing world is not how you're going to survive. It will kill you. And so we can't let that cognitive impairment, that freeze happen. We need to keep moving. But it's also really interesting in the survival psychology, something else that kicks in. And it's pure, the Americans in war call it give-up-itis. People simply give up. They actually just give up. And they turn to death and non-survival in a more positive way than they do to survival. So again, there's a famous case in 1994. There was a light aircraft came down in Sierra Nevada. 3 people on board, the pilot and 2 others. The pilot was injured in his ribs, his arms, his ankle. One other passenger had minor, just literally bruising, no injuries, and another one was trapped in the fuselage but was actually healthy enough. Now the pilot set off for rescue with his injured ankle, injured ribs, injured arm, and spent 11 days across the snow-covered mountains, finally making it to a road to get rescue. 11 days, no food, no water, but he survived. He had those qualities I mentioned earlier. He alerted the rescue teams who made it within a few hours to the aircraft to find the other 2 dead. The other 2 had simply died. No real reason, though. There was no injury. They had plenty of shelter. They had materials to make fire. They had fresh water. They had some food in the plane. So there was no reason they should have died. They wouldn't have starved in 11 days, but they did. And the investigation simply thought it was just depression. It was just giving up. They just simply gave up. It's the Everest death zone again. If you stop moving it, you think, oh, what's the point? You just give up. Often a widow or widower can give up after their partner has died. And we see that again and again. People just can mentally think, okay, I'm checking out. And then the body checks out very, very quickly afterwards. How do we stop that? It's all about goals and motivation. You have to set goals. I spoke about goals in one of my previous videos. You have to set goals. People have to have a goal. It's a thing that gets you through a traumatic event. What am I doing? What am I aiming for? Keep moving. Keep in that flow. So having good goals, having motivation, even though we're 12 months into the pandemic and the end line is in sight, the rescue is in sight with the vaccines, we cannot afford to now just sit down and wait this out for the next few months until the normal comes back, because the normal ain't coming back anyway. We are in the death zone. We have to keep on moving. My next video is going to focus on that, because there are actually 5 moments to a survival journey. There's the pre-impact, before the doom. There's the impact, the actual event. Then there's the recovery, which we're in right now in terms of the pandemic. There's the rescue, and then there's the post-trauma. And I'm really interested to talk next time to you about the post-trauma, how society, how consumers, and how we as business leaders are going to cope with after this pandemic and trauma. So from a survival point of view, there's your tips. If you ever find yourself in an earthquake, in a mad situation, you've got your qualities, keep on moving, keep on going. Until the next time, I'm Ken Hughes.